Hello, I'm Jay McTighe, and like many of you, I have been intrigued by the possibilities of new artificial intelligence tools, or AI. The most widely known of these is ChatGPT. I've been interested in both the possibilities, but also some of the concerns in using these tools in education. And while I'm no expert, I have been trying to learn about these tools for some time. And in this short video, I'll share some of the capabilities as well as some of the potential perils of using ChatGPT and related AI tools in our profession. In this video, I will pause several times so that for those of you who might be viewing this in a group, you could pause the video and have discussion about some of the points that are generated. So I hope you found this interesting. I'm going to share my screen and share some of my thoughts about generative AI. So we are witnessing what some have described as a hugely transformative and even disruptive technology. Some have even proposed that it rivals the potential impact of the internet itself. Regardless of what you think about these, the horse is out of the barn, so to speak. And while I know that some schools and school districts have banned the use of ChatGPT and other generative AI tools, personally, I don't agree with that. I think these are here to stay. We're on the beginning wave of what promises to be a continuing, emerging, and increasingly powerful technology. And so I believe it's time to have a professional, open-minded but skeptical inquiry into both the promises and the perils, and come up with solid ways of using these technologies for the good while mitigating the potential areas of problem. So permit me to highlight just a few of the capabilities of these techniques. ChatGPT is perhaps the most well-known of the current new tools. This is a, quote, large language AI system developed by the company OpenAI. The first iteration that was released publicly was done in November of 2022, and this was ChatGPT 3.5. Since then, in March of this year, March of 2023, ChatGPT 4.0 was released. And even in that short interval, the capabilities of 4.0 are much greater than its previous version. And it's symbolic of the fact that these tools are continuing to build and to learn and to expand their capabilities. A related AI tool is named DALL-E, riffing off the artist's name. And in fact, there's a second edition of this, or second iteration of this, DALL-E 2, also developed by OpenAI. While ChatGPT is basically a text-based system, although it also allows responses that are done in natural language, DALL-E is an image-based production system where it can generate, quote, original artworks, photographs or photorealistic images, or images that imitate painting or graphics, etc. And it does so from a synthesis of billions of parameters from the internet that are now synthesized and placed together in response to a language or text prompt. So ChatGPT, again, is like a search engine in that it can find information, but unlike a Google search, which typically would yield links that you would have to further explore, ChatGPT can give you its, quote, answers or responses in real time, in real language. Accordingly, it can generate written products. So it can generate an essay or a letter of recommendation, or an op-ed piece on a given topic. It could produce research papers. It can actually produce computer code given the right prompts. ChatGPT also has a powerful language translation engine, if you will, so it can translate to and from various languages. Whereas DALL-E, as I mentioned, can produce images. Now, one of the concerns that has been rightfully voiced is the recognition that some of the information that ChatGPT might yield may not be completely accurate or timely or unbiased. My understanding is that at least with ChatGPT 3.5, it had scraped the internet for information up through the end of 2021. And so if you gave a query that was more contemporary, it may not have an answer. Now, understandably, they have been continuing to provide more information, so it may be closer to present day information, but there's still the concern that it may be inaccurate. There's also the concern about bias, because essentially these large language models scrape the internet for virtually all the content that's out there. And if there's biased information in the internet, that potentially could be reflected in the response of a query. So cautionary note is important given this reality. So if you are watching in a group and wish to, perhaps you'd stop the tape right now and just engage in some initial conversations around these three questions. So I'm going to keep going, but again, some of you may have paused for a conversation. All right, so let me highlight a couple of the concerns. The most prominent of which that I hear in education is a concern of plagiarism. Because ChatGPT can generate a written response to a prompt, it can create essays, it could produce a research paper, it can actually code a computer or produce a computer code, and DALL-E can produce images. The concern, of course, is that students will pick up on these capabilities and produce work that's not their own. And this is a viable concern. Let me just show you a few examples of the kind of information that can be retrieved from these systems. As I was playing around with it, I asked ChatGPT to write a haiku about a bagel. And here's the response I got in 12 seconds or less. Pretty interesting, I thought. And then I asked it for some information, in this case, or actually for a writing prompt, write a 150-word story about a lucky cat. And here's what was produced in 20 seconds. Now you could pause the video if you want to read the whole thing, but this was just meant to be illustrative. And I notice I specified 150-word story, so it was short. By the way, I was interested also to note that if you're familiar with that lucky cat image and you see them up in Chinese or Japanese restaurants with the cat's arm waving, that is a lucky cat. So the ChatGPT interpreted that part of my prompt to highlight the story in Tokyo, which I thought was interesting. I didn't ask it to write a story in China or Japan. Here are a few examples of images created from text descriptions from DALL-E. These were two images that were on its website as meant to be illustrative. And then I gave it some prompts to see what it would produce. So one of those was this one. I asked DALL-E to create an image of the Eiffel Tower in the style of Salvador Dali. And I got back 5 images. Here were 3 of them. Pretty interesting, less than 30 seconds. I also asked it to create an image of a hummingbird playing with a frog. And these were 2 of 6 images that it returned. So there are many other examples we could cite, but you get the point. It can generate products, and students could use these tools in response to an assignment or a performance task or a project. So here's one idea or a related set of ideas for dealing with this potential problem of plagiarism. Have students create at least a first draft of any assignment, writing prompt, computer code assignment, or artwork in school without access to these apps. So at least you know students are doing original work, at least to start. Then give the same essay prompt or computer code assignment or art task to ChatGPT or DALL-E and see what it can produce. Then you could compare students' drafts with what these tools have yielded. Now, I recommend if you do this, have a rubric in advance for your argumentation essay or your creative story or the qualities of an efficient computer code or quality artwork, so that you can look critically at ChatGPT or DALL-E's response and also guide students in looking at their own drafts accordingly. But the question is, what might we learn from these examples that these generative tools can create? I think that's a way of productively using the tools without falling into the plagiarism worry. Now, a second concern that's been noted, some information yielded might be inaccurate, incomplete, or even biased. This, to me, highlights the need to stress and, in fact, develop students' capacity to critically analyze any information that they receive from this or other search tools. While critical thinking is not a new goal in education, I think it really needs to be one of the basic skills of a modern education. And from the early grades on, we should teach kids how to critically evaluate what they receive. And here are a few questions that are meant to prompt their thinking. So another implication, of course, is that because we can get information from these tools in natural language, this can be, in fact, a good research tool for students when they're researching a topic, when they're working on an independent study, pursuing a topic of interest that may be outside the curriculum or beyond the teacher's area of expertise. Again, one of the skill sets that I think is especially important in this regard is teaching kids how to create sharp, focused prompts and queries in order to yield the right information or to get the information they're seeking. Any of you that have gone through a doctoral program or in the midst of it may recognize that one of the skill sets for a doctoral student is being able to identify a clear, focused, but also achievable research question. And that's a skill set. And that same skill set at a maybe less developed level, I think is important for students as they have opportunities to use these tools. And as noted earlier, we also need to develop their skills of critically evaluating whatever information they receive. Here's an information query that I posed to ChatGPT. How long did it take to build the Great Wall of China? Here was the response I got in less than 12 seconds. So play around with these tools and queries just to see what you can get. And also play around with changing the wording of your query or your prompt and see what, if any, effect it has on the responses. So ChatGPT can also provide translations to and from many languages. And I think this is an interesting possibility for some subject areas. I mean, think about it. You can actually read primary source documents in the original using these translation capabilities. Let me give you a few examples of some of my inquiry. just to see what it might do, I asked ChatGPT to translate the Pledge of Allegiance into Hungarian. I got this in 2 seconds. Now, admittedly, I don't speak Hungarian, nor do I know anyone who does, so I can't check this. Although I bet you could plug this in and ask it to translate it into English, and you'd see perhaps how well the translation occurred. Here's another example. Now, this is something that I knew in advance, and I was curious to see what it could do. So I asked it to give me the original Declaration of Independence that was issued by Ho Chi Minh in 1946. And I asked it to get the original in Vietnamese. This was a portion, this was the front end of that response that I got. Then I copied and pasted this into ChatGPT for a second query saying, translate this to English. And if you don't know where I was going for, check out the response. The first 2 sentences of the Declaration of Independence of Vietnam are from the US Declaration, but notice the 3rd paragraph. I thought this was very interesting, and being able to see it in the original, I think, adds a richness to this particular research. So, as I mentioned, potentially for some subjects where it makes sense, we could look at original thinkers or writers or artists and translate their works so we can see them directly. All right, here's some other capabilities. ChatGPT can provide explanations and tutorials on various topics and or skill areas. So I asked it this question. I asked it to explain the concept of vectors, an abstract concept in science and engineering and mathematics, for a high school student. And this was my very quick reply from ChatGPT. Once again, you can pause the video if you want to read the whole thing, but watch the next prompt. I asked it then to explain the concept of vectors for a 5th grader and look at the difference. So I found this very interesting, and I hope you can imagine some possibilities for teaching. Now, because I am a now emerging pickleball player at a later age, I wanted to see what it might do when asked to give advice for a skill. So my prompt was, give me tips for serving in pickleball. And here was the response I got in less than 4 seconds. And I paid $40 to a pickleball instructor for a clinic on serving, and this is essentially what he told me, although we had time to practice. So the point being, students can use this tool when they're previewing a topic, when they're reviewing, when they need extra help, when they need a tutorial. But also, as educators, we can get ideas for teaching things, especially if you're teaching a new course or a new grade level or a new topic or skill. So I found that interesting. Now, let's get in even more application to education. We can ask ChatGPT to generate a lesson plan, create an assignment or a performance task. Prompts for writing and discussion are all possible. Here are a few examples of these. I asked ChatGPT to give me some discussion questions that I could use for a discussion of The Great Gatsby, that great American novel. It gave me 12 questions. I was able to get 9 on the screen. Take a moment just to skim some of these questions. I thought these were quite good. Then I asked it to create a lesson plan to teach the color wheel, since my daughter Julia has been an elementary art teacher. And it gave me, in this case, a 3-page or 3-slide response. So it gave me the objective to teach the color wheel and understand the basic principles and primary and secondary and tertiary colors and their relationships, the materials I would need, how to introduce the unit, the instruction that would be provided, their application, what they're actually going to do, how I might assess them, and this is really formative assessment, a closure, and even ideas for extension. So this to me was very interesting. Again, less than a minute, it gave me a lesson plan. So implication, when necessary, you can get practical ideas for your own lesson planning. Once again, I'm not advocating that we just throw curriculum design or assessment or lesson planning over to these tools, but I am saying that they can provide some useful information, particularly when we have enough background to evaluate what they give us. I'm not going to follow a lesson plan lockstep necessarily, but it might give me 1 or 2 good ideas that I hadn't thought of. So to me, that's a positive. Now, ChatGPT can also help with assessments, and I'll give you 2 examples of prompts that I gave it. I asked it to create a 10-item multiple choice test on the cell, and the first 5 of the 10 items are shown on the screen. Now, you of course would have to decide how important is it for students to know this information and the extent to which you want to test it. But nonetheless, it can generate test questions. I also, since I'm an advocate for the use of performance-based assessments in conjunction with more traditional answer-based tests, I asked it to create an authentic performance task that could be used to assess students' understanding of linear equations. And it gave me what I thought was a very solid, quote, authentic task. In a nutshell, the students are given information on profit data or profit information on 2 local businesses, and they're given information on their revenue over time, the cost and profit for each quarter, and they have to generate linear equations to plot that data. And for example, it might be decide which of these businesses you would invest in. On the second page, or in this case, second slide, a specification of requirements and the criteria by which their final product would be judged. So again, this is intriguing to me that we can generate traditional test questions and performance tasks and projects, even project-based learning ideas from these tools. Relatedly, we can identify or ask for help identifying success criteria and actual rubrics from ChatGPT. And I'll show you a couple that I asked for. I asked ChatGPT to give me the, quote, success criteria for judging the quality of an argument. And here were 6 criteria that were delivered. Having studied argumentation and encouraging teachers to include it in their teaching and their assessments, I think this is a very good list. I asked it to generate an analytic rubric for an oral presentation, a 4-point rubric, and here was what I received in about 8 seconds. And for me, again, this is a very solid list. Now, notice I asked for an analytic rubric. It didn't break it out into a matrix form, as I would be more likely to do. But you can see the 4 bullets in each of the score points, and you could format it in a matrix or a grid sort of way. So it is analytic in nature. I'm working with a district that has identified a, quote, profile or portrait of a graduate. And one of their profile competencies is innovative problem solver. And I've been working with their team on creating indicators and rubrics for these competencies. So I was curious to see what ChatGPT would offer. And here were 3 of the categories associated with an innovative problem solver. Once again, I think this is pretty solid. I might not use it completely as is, but I could incorporate many of the words and the levels that it offered. So we can use these to generate success criteria and rubrics. We can use these to match against ones that we're already using. We can engage students in thinking about success criteria for various assignments and performance tasks. And then, like I had suggested with writing, let's see what ChatGPT might offer. Let's see how its criteria or its rubric compares to ours. And so using it as a thoughtful discussion stimulus. All right, I've been talking at you a lot. So for those of you in groups who wish to, let me pause and let you converse a bit about what you've heard me say and maybe other things that you know about ChatGPT. And here are some prompting questions for you to consider in your conversation. So pause if you wish and converse. Okay, I'm going to continue for those of you who are not in a group or when you've unpaused the video. So a few other ideas before I conclude. Now this is getting into another realm that's interesting. ChatGPT and tools that are generated from it can evaluate or give feedback to actual student work. For instance, writing, maybe a data display or example of a linear equation was used. Give feedback on one's mathematical reasoning or logic. It can evaluate the quality and effectiveness and efficiency of computer code, as well as the accuracy of language translation. And so one of the ways we could use this as a feedback system to give students personalized feedback on their draft work. Now, I have a friend named Mike Rutherford who has developed a very interesting app called Got Learning, and it's used for teachers to capture information just from conversations with students. So it's sort of qualitative data gathering tool. And Mike has been recently experimenting with an AI programmer to actually give feedback to students. And his tool is part of Got Learning, but it's called Got Feedback. And this is a beta form. So take a look at what's on the screen and let me just explain it if it's not already obvious. Let's say that you are working with students on narrative structure in writing, and you can actually paste in draft student writing, and you see that in the middle box where it says paste below, or you could upload a file, maybe a Word file, to it. And then its evaluation and feedback is provided in the blue box below. This was generated by the AI system incorporated in Got Feedback. So this is literally personalized feedback. Here's an example for a different focus. In this case, details provided in expository writing. Again, the student's draft is starting with gunpowder was first introduced in the top box, and the feedback provided below in blue. Again, you can pause if you want to study these in more detail, but I just want to give you an overview. Here's an example where the focus is argumentation, in particular, stating a claim for an argumentation piece. So I think this has enormous potential. Again, my thinking is that we have to view these kinds of tools critically. We're not going to accept it as gospel, whatever they give back. And again, I would like to temper any feedback or evaluation from Got Feedback or any related system against well-developed rubrics that we may already have. But nonetheless, I think the potential for giving students feedback, especially individual feedback, is enormous, especially as a formative tool. I asked Mike Rutherford if Got Feedback could address computer code, and he gave me this example. He pasted in a bit of Python code to use to decide if a number is a prime number or not. And below it gave some suggestions for how to make the how to actually program that code more efficiently than the initial draft that it was provided. So again, I think we're just on the tip of extraordinary possibilities with these tools, but also, of course, there is potential for abuse, and we need to be mindful and cautious about those things. So this is just a summary of what I proposed and the idea that I offered. Now, no doubt there are other capabilities of these tools that exist now and especially will emerge in the future, and those will lead to other ideas as well. So again, if you're in a group and you want to pause, you might want to talk about your reaction both to the Got Feedback examples I showed you just now, and any other capabilities or concerns that come to mind. So if you want to pause, here are a few other prompting questions. All right, I'm going to wrap up my session with a couple of my thoughts. I've highlighted two of the three skills that I think are important in this era, but I just want to highlight again. Teaching students how to create effective prompts to elicit the information they're seeking as they use ChatGPT and other search engines, I think is a basic skill, and it's something that can be developed from the early grades on. As noted several times, we need to help students learn how to think critically and how to evaluate any information they get. And a third implication for me is the importance of helping students understand the ethics of using these tools properly and ethically. This includes citing sources, checking sources for where they originate as much as we can, not plagiarizing, not claiming that some work you downloaded in 12 seconds is original work, and so on. So these at least are some of the skills that I think accompany the potential of these generative AI tools. So I'll wrap up with one more quick thought. as I'm watching educators learn about and consider these tools, I'm seeing a couple of kind of general trends. One is a negative trend of being worried by, if not frightened over these, and seeking to ban them. Personally, I don't think this is wise. On the other hand, I see some people who are wildly enthusiastic and just can't wait to bring these in and use them productively. I actually think that some stance kind of in the middle is in order. An open-minded willingness to learn about these tools and consider their potential, while also remaining skeptical and critical of potential abuses and looking to put in guardrails, if you will, to avoid potential abuses. Here's a way of thinking about it. We often talk about wanting to engage students in genuine inquiry into things that matter. Consider these emerging AI tools as a unique opportunity for us as professionals to engage in a professional inquiry as we learn about and consider the pros and cons of generative AI. So I leave you with that thought. Thank you for watching, and I hope that this was an interesting session.